Welcome to MSL Talk with Tom Caravela, a podcast specifically designed for MSLs and all things field medical. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. My guests today are Jessica Johnson and Whitney Tice of Neurocrine Biosciences, and we talk about the path from clinical practice to field medical. So awesome, really good information. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and Instagram. Hope you guys like this. Hey guys, thanks for joining me. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you guys here. How you doing today?
Good.
Awesome.
Could be a little warmer in Florida, but it's okay.
Well,
you're headed this way.
we have a bit of we have contrasting like time zones and like weather, because Jess, you're in Florida where it's beautiful, and Whitney, you're in Denver where you're supposed to be getting like 5 feet of snow.
That's right. That's right.
Boy.
Good ski weather.
Well, for anyone listening, you have to actually tune into the YouTube version of this podcast because Whitney has ski earrings. They're actually skis, like literally ski earrings.
That's right. That's right. I, again, am a little bit superstitious, and I feel like wearing these earrings might channel the powder gods. So
yeah. So check it out.
Yeah.
So guys, welcome. Thanks for joining me. Let's start with some introductions. Jess, why don't you go first?
Okay. Hi, Jessica Johnson, and I reside in Florida. I work for Neurocrine as the director of our clinical practice liaison team. I've been at Neurocrine now for 5 years, just celebrated the big 5 anniversary. And have the plaque to prove it. And with that, I, by background, am a nurse practitioner and spent a number of years, about 13 years in clinical practice here in Florida, and then decided to take a new adventure in pharma. And I've been in medical affairs for probably going on the 14th year now.
Awesome. That's great. And Whitney, what about you?
Great. Yeah, I am a neurology nurse practitioner by training. I was a nurse practitioner for about 5 years, subspecialized in headache and movement disorders. Prior to becoming a nurse practitioner, I was a nurse in the hospital setting. And I joined the company Neurocrine about a year ago on Jessica's team as a clinical practice liaison, or CPL.
Awesome. And I'm looking forward to talking about this CPL, clinical practice liaison and clinical practice transition to field medical. I think it's an awesome topic. And thank you guys. Jess, thanks for coming up with this. This was your idea. And I've known Jess for a long time, and we've got kind of reconnected through the podcast, right?
Yes. If I had not seen one of your podcasts, I would not have reconnected after about 5 years. And I will say, Tom, I love all of the podcasts, and I have been routinely referring my team to the podcast. A few of them a few CPLs on my team have not had industry experience. So you can come into this role without industry experience, straight from the clinic, just like Whitney has. And I think these podcasts are really good, even if it's information that they already are aware of, just as a refresher. So thank you for doing them and getting us reconnected.
Awesome. Well, that makes me feel good. I'm glad. And, you bring up a good point. So one of the things that people always ask me is they love to hear stories about how people transition into industry. So maybe we'll start there. So Whitney, why don't you tell us how you went from a clinician into industry?
Yeah. So, I was lucky enough in my practice setting to have an MSL who served as my mentor. And, she was also a nurse practitioner in her previous life. So, she really kind of taught me the ins and outs of the role. But, for me, I think really the appeal of becoming an MSL was to really broaden my scope and have that potential to impact more patient lives. So, and I was really happy with my life as a clinician, but, I wanted something bigger. So, for those who are listening and maybe can feel that sentiment, I encourage you to brush up the old resume, get that LinkedIn profile looking good, or maybe even open up a LinkedIn account, because you never know. I was approached on LinkedIn by a headhunter and for this position. So again, I'm really grateful for the transition.
And what was your experience, Jess? How did you go from clinician to industry?
So I came into industry a little bit by accident. I had actually an old nurse practitioner student who encouraged me to look at the role because he knew I was trying to finish a dissertation, which I was struggling to do. And I was okay and pretty happy in my clinical life, but I was actually looking for something more. And I wanted to continue to serve patients. I wanted to continue to be working with healthcare providers. And again, just struggling to finish the PhD and looking for what maybe more I could be doing after 13 years. I had worked in several different practice settings. So I've done academia where I've had residents and med students that I taught in clinic, and I've also done private practice, and I've worked for specialists. So I was ready. I felt like I had run the gamut and was ready for just a big challenge, a new challenge. And I love the fact that in this role, you're learning something every day. So when you're a nurse practitioner, I think if people often ask me, what is the one thing that you miss the most about being a nurse practitioner? And I tell them being an expert at something, because I feel like as an NP, I was an expert in my clinical area, but in this role, even after so many years, even after a decade, I feel like I know a lot about a lot of different buckets of things, and I'm able to do many different jobs and roles within the company. But I don't know that I feel like an expert like I did as a clinician. So I guess that's something I can aspire to.
You're an expert. What are you talking about? It's interesting in my world, on my side of the equation as a recruiter, we're getting a lot of requests from field medical leaders for clinicians, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, advanced practice nurses. So why are clinicians good candidates for field medical positions?
I can take that question. And I think the very core of being an MSL is to bring this high level data to providers within your therapeutic area, your product. And, there can be a disconnect, as a clinician, most of clinicians don't practice in an academic setting. So, and even if they do, they're patient facing. So they don't really, have that background in clinical trials. So, when someone from medical affairs comes to talk about the data, there can be that disconnect. How is this meaningful for me? But I think, as clinicians, we possess that ability to really bridge that gap and to make that high level data clinically meaningful for the providers that we meet with, so that ultimately they can use it in a way that, is meaningful for them and can help their patients.
Got you. Jess, anything to add?
I just think having the beds, we say bedside, but it's not necessarily bedside anymore. I just think having that patient touch factor, and also even working with care givers or care partners is what we now refer to caregivers as. I think having that ability to have empathy and understanding of where the patient journey has been really something that we've seen as a big impact. Not only for our external stakeholders, so our what we would call our KOLs, but also with our internal stakeholders. We are often asked here at Neurocrine by our commercial and marketing partners, can I get a clinician's perspective? And they will call on my team. We have medical directors, and obviously we work really closely with our medical directors, and they approach my team as well as credible, currently practicing or very recently practicing NPs and PAs. So that's the beauty, I would say.
And you guys, your title is a clinical practice liaison. So if you can give me a definition of what a clinical practice liaison is, and how did that come to fruition, and how is it differ from a medical science liaison? I don't know if I just asked you 3 questions or 1, but I'm curious.
We'll get it. Do you want me to do it with me or?
Yeah, you can go ahead and start because it is your team.
So, we played around with the idea of what we were going to call this position here at Neurocrine when I was granted the opportunity to start the team. Maybe it helps to give a little bit of background as to how the position evolved here at Neurocrine. So at Neurocrine, I started as a field senior MSL, returned to the field. I had been in management at my previous company. And I really loved being back in the field. And it was refreshing to have my own territory and kind of manage myself and just go day to day, see the healthcare providers. And I quickly identified, because I'm currently working in the psychiatry space, that the advanced practice providers were really key to getting the information to, and also making sure that that they had the information to share with patients about our products and our disease states. And so I leveraged my relationships as well as my networking skills and my past life as an NP to really tackle the advanced practice space along with my physician KOLs. And I started to develop relationships with professional organizations, some of the advocacy groups, and then more broadly, some of the academic NP/PA groups and programs like at universities. So I really just highlighted for the company that if we weren't focusing on the advanced practice audience, that we were really missing the mark. Especially with the number of advanced practice providers that are practicing today in the US. We have over 450,000 NPs and PAs currently practicing. And that number, looking at some of the Bureau, actually right from the Bureau of Stats, labor stats, we're going to see those numbers significantly increase by the end of the decade. So we know that by the end of this decade, we're going to have the nurse practitioner and PA role will be one of the top 10 roles out there as far as jobs. So in a sense, like I said, if we don't get to the nurse practitioners who are really in the trenches and the PAs really in the trenches, especially in our psychiatry therapeutic area, I just thought that we were going to have a huge miss. So with that, I was fortunate enough to work in a company that was allowed innovation, and it was brought to my attention that maybe we should start, let's start it. So I championed for it, and we started with a very small team of 2 clinical practice liaisons and myself, covering the entire country. And then very rapidly, within 2 years, I was able to expand the team to a total of 8 plus myself.
Wow. Awesome. That's a great story, because a lot of times, organizations might not be that receptive to this paradigm shift. So you create this clinical practice liaison role, actually the whole team. So what are the responsibilities? Maybe Whitney, this is a good question for you. What are the responsibilities of a CPL?
Yeah, and I think for myself personally, this was more of sort of a subjective, responsibilities. You go from being a clinician where you have this very objective schedule. You see 8 patients per, half day, 16 patients per day. And now you're in this role where, maybe it isn't that clear, but I think, our team has sort of developed these 3 pillars, that we sort of live by, if you will. And I'll kind of go into them. So the first is education, and our role is to bring the most current data to our providers in a way that's clinically meaningful. I touched upon that before. Number 2 is research. And again, I think this is something that's really important and something that we are always, striving to improve. Typically, you think of physicians, as being the lead investigators, right? So really what we are working to change is that, the advanced practice providers will be investigators and, will be part of research. So again, we have a lot of protocols that are led by APPs, sponsored by the company, and then investigator initiated. And then the third pillar is practice. Okay. And again, I touched upon that before, bringing that data in a way that's meaningful, and then of course, educating about disease state in our therapeutic areas and products.
So is it safe to say that a CPL differs from an MSL in really who they call on more so than anything else? Is that one of the main?
Yeah, I would say, typically in the MSL role, the MSLs are calling on physicians at academic centers. And, for us, our KOL, key opinion leader, is the advanced practice provider. But, we sort of try to broaden that definition of a key opinion leader. And maybe that advanced practice provider is in a rural setting and might, have a huge influence in education and have a lot of students coming in through clinical rotation. So we're always, continuing to identify those local, regional, national advanced practice provider and even, nursing KOLs who are nurses, who might just have influence, in an area that's a little bit different than that traditional physician, key opinion leader, maybe, at an academic setting.
Yeah. So Whitney, you were a clinician that came right into this role. Jess, you were a clinician that became an MSL that went into this role. So what would you say the differences are from what you were doing as an MSL and what your team does now?
So I'll just echo what Whitney said. When we describe this role, again, it is a novel role in the industry at present. And I feel like we're very forward thinking as a company. I describe the role as there are two main differences between the clinical practice liaison and the traditional MSL. And the first one being that everyone on my team has been an active clinician at some point and may even practice a very small amount to keep up credentials still currently. So maybe that's 8 hours a month, whatever their state licensure and certification requirements are. And then secondly, it is the audience. So sure, if there is a physician in the audience or a pharmacist or a researcher, we absolutely can speak to those individuals. But really our primary proactive approach is to be identifying advanced practice providers and nurses and support staff. So when you think about, for us, we are currently in the psychiatry and neurology space. So in psychiatry, there are case managers, there are social workers, there are therapists. So even for in that particular space, it could be even more broad. I think
it makes sense. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And I think when you look at the whole interdisciplinary, the continuum of care, let's call it, and all of the providers of care, it makes sense to focus on everyone if the company has the bandwidth. So when you look at hiring, let's just say, what skills are you looking for? The same skills in a CPL that you would look for in an MSL, or are there any differences?
So I would say for the most part, because I've also been an MSL manager, so I spent over 5 years as a medical science liaison manager in my former company, and I did a lot of recruiting and hiring, and just like I've done here, I wouldn't say there's a cookie cutter, profile that I'm necessarily looking for. I love to have diversity on my team where we can all leverage each other's skills and leverage each other's strengths. So I think the things that I would look for, whether it be an MSL or a CPL as a hiring manager, are a lot of the, I would say, soft skills. So we can teach scientific acumen. We can help people understand data and clinical trials, and you can memorize things. The things that I can't really teach or train on, even though we do say we're going to have some soft skills training, are the intrinsic characteristics like self-starter, self-motivated, responsive, and maybe, the 2 C's. Communication is very important. So and I don't mean just verbal communication, also written communication, being able to communicate across different departments at our company. So we have to be able to change that message and to flex with our audience, whether we're talking to a case manager or a physician or a nurse practitioner. So flexibility in communication, and also collaboration. So, as I said, we're communicating across different departments in our company, but we also are collaborating and trying to make sure that we look seamless in the field and that we're all one company. So we have to be collaborative with our respective MSL colleagues, and we have to be collaborative with our sales colleagues and in a compliant manner. And I think, the 2 C's, communication, collaboration, being responsive, making sure that you address things in a timely manner. And then at the end, kind of like in nursing, knowing when to ask for help, knowing when you've gotten in too far over your head and you don't know if what you're doing is right or wrong. So, being okay with picking up the phone and calling someone who's more experienced.
Yeah. So as you're going through this, I'm thinking there's training needs, obviously. So how does your company handle training? Is it, you guys get the same training MSLs do? Is it separate? How is that handled internally? I'm just curious, because obviously, as I'm hearing you talk about these requirements and skills, I would think that there's got to be some training needs.
So Whitney, I believe, onboarded at the same time as one of our new medical liaisons, and who was novice to the role as well, and they both went through exactly the same 12-week rigor of the onboarding, home study, that type of laid out plan, and then the shadowing. And of course, that's been difficult with the pandemic, but shadowing other tenured field medical affairs colleagues. So whether it be a tenured CPL or a tenured MSL, I think that they benefit from seeing both of those opportunities.
Yeah, cool.
And Jessica, you alluded to this before. I mean, you're always learning and evolving on the job.
Yeah.
So I certainly had my orientation onboarding process, but I've really had to be proactive about learning. And when I shadow, I feel like I make an effort to actively contribute to the discussion. And if I'm shadowing, an MSL counterpart, and we have our MSLs, I really find that the marriage or collaboration of, our past experiences, mine as clinician, and maybe the MSLs as someone who's got a pharmacy or bench scientist background, really makes for a beautiful, unique presentation, scientific discussion with our providers.
Got you. So Whitney, you're out there now and you're doing this. What challenges are you facing? What are your biggest challenges as a CPL?
I think for me personally, learning the compliance side of everything, regulatory rules. Tom, you had a podcast on that, and we listened to it as a team, and it was really, really helpful. But I think that's a huge piece of transitioning to industry. Your intentions are very good. I meet with a provider, I want to send them an article. My intentions are good, but I can't necessarily send them that article because there's just rules about that being seen as a transfer of value. So just navigating that, but just like Jess said, asking questions. I think also partnering compliantly with our commercial colleagues, in supporting of their training, and then responding to requests that they're hearing from providers. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, again, I talked about it before, sort of how this job is a little bit more subjective than objective, in terms of the day-to-day. So instead of, seeing 8 patients in the morning, 8 patients in the afternoon, every day is a little bit different. You're always, seeking to define that.
Yeah. So that leads me to So you're out there, you're doing this, you have a team. Jess, you have a team now. So how are these guys evaluated? Like what would you say, Jess, makes a top performing CPL?
So the age-old question. We're still trying to answer that with MSLs. So we don't, in our company, we don't have a lot of hard metrics. The bread and butter for MSLing or CPLing is bringing insights back to the company. So the actionable insights are what we focus on. Collaboration, where we may have the opportunity to introduce our marketing leadership to important advanced practice KOLs in the out in the space. I think making sure that you don't get insights unless you talk to people, and that's where the difficulty comes with metrics. So we say we don't have metrics, but we ask you to bring back actionable insights. So you've got to talk to people to get actionable insights. So you've got to go out and meet with people. And sometimes you don't come back with an actionable insight or even any insight. So every visit is not going to equal an insight or even 4 insights. So insights are important, bringing back that voice of customer, being able to have, again, compliant, collaborative relationships with your sales and marketing counterparts. So that's something where, we answer unsolicited medical information requests. So making sure that those are taken care of. I mean, that is something that you can definitely measure if somebody has, done what they're supposed to do in the appropriate amount of time. Making sure that we are responsive when there are deadlines. So like if we have a speaker training coming up, or maybe we have an ad board coming up and we've asked for input. So our team, if you know your geography, who the people are that we would probably want to invite and extend invitations to for some type of committee or ad board. So having those relationships and being able to leverage that and bring them in to provide value for the company. Obviously, we can't measure on any types of research proposals or publications or posters, but working with people to facilitate those when they have an interest is also something that we look at as far as objectives and performance.
So obviously it's more of a qualitative sort of thing.
Very similar to the MSL.
Yeah. So what's next? So you're in a CPL role, you're a clinical practice liaison. What other career options are there? Is it you go from a CPL to an MSL or a CPL to a medical director, or like what can people aspire to from this CPL role?
So similar to the MSL role, in fact, just last year I was able to, since it was a new role, it's hard to come in and have HR agree that you're going to have 2 different levels when you've never had the role before. So I was able to write the job description and get approval for the senior level, similarly to our MSLs positions here at Neurocrine. We have the MSL level and then the senior MSL. So we now have 2 levels for our CPL team. With that, I think that the opportunities, depending on if you are able to transition into a home office role, the opportunities are similar to being an MSL. So some of the members of my team are doctorally prepared. There are others on the team that are working on that. So, we always think that, you have to have a doctorate. You don't have to have a doctorate for this position. Is it something that, in the future might be beneficial for, say, transitioning to an in-house role? I think we're starting to see in industry, especially with the pandemic, that not everyone has to work and live in the home office location. So we're seeing more positions like associate medical director, and those are not necessarily physicians, and they're not necessarily home office based. So I would think that as time evolves, and we, of course, come out of the pandemic, and we've seen for the past year that people can work in a productive way and work remotely and still be extremely effective, that there will be more opportunities in-house, but for people who don't want to relocate and want to remain field-based, that they can do that.
Got you. So Whitney, what advice do you have? Two-part question. What advice do you have for somebody that's a clinician that wants to try to get into this role? And then you get into this role, what's your advice that you have for them and how they can be successful?
Sure. Yeah. So the first part of your question, those looking to get into industry, and I'll, emphasize it again, just, go update your resume, have someone look at it, open up that linked account, put a profile picture up, listen to this podcast. I think, Tom, this is such a great resource, to hear others' experiences, to learn about the role. And then the second part of the question, advice that I have for others, in this role. So anyone working in medical affairs, we've talked a lot, in the past year about this idea of emotional intelligence, and, making that, that's an abstract statement. I think making it meaningful is emotional intelligence is so important for this job. And I think don't undervalue your experience as a clinician. You have that emotional intelligence. You have that ability to listen, and I think it just really sets you up well for this role. Just, for a specific example, if I meet with a provider, during their workday and they're running late because they're seeing patients, and I've been there, you always have that really difficult patient right before lunch or right before the end of the day. So if they're late with meeting us, I completely empathize and I get that. So that emotional intelligence is really important. I think, again, just to piggyback off with what Jessica said earlier, follow up, being responsive, is so important in this role. As a clinician, you have your patient in basket, where patients can message you in between visits. And as a provider, I would just, if that in basket got full and if I didn't respond, I would start to twitch a little bit. So that sort of carried over to this role, in that, I'm really receptive to my email, or if I get requests from commercial, following up, being responsive is so important. And again, you've got that because you were already a clinician. So, really that experience lends itself to succeeding in this role.
Awesome. Great advice. So Jess, I'll give you the last word. What advice do you have for our listeners out there?
Just be open-minded to other opportunities. I didn't know that the medical liaison world existed. And again, I fell into it by accident almost, but it was because I had a student who saw that I could do more than just see patients day in and day out. So I would say just keep an open mind about your career. Do your own research. There are a lot of paths out there. Even if you didn't go into, say, an industry role like this in medical affairs, there are clinical trial roles. It's not just about seeing patients, and where you can contribute to patients at the end of the day. So I feel good every day that I have contributed to patients, even though I'm not necessarily touching them.
Well, you guys are awesome, and I appreciate you taking time. I learned a lot. This was really insightful. I didn't even know that this whole world existed. I mean, I've heard about it and you see different titles, but this was really good information, and I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you coming on, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Love it.
We should do this live in Florida.
We're ready. Thank you, Tom. This was an awesome opportunity. We're really appreciative.
Good job, guys. Thanks again. We'll keep in touch.
All right. Thanks, Tom.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, please subscribe so that you don't miss episodes in the future, and feel free to leave a rating or a review or a comment. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.